I think this is a good time to remind ourselves that things like deaths happen outside of here. Not here. A life at Lumon is protected from such things.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we are discussing Severance Episode 5, The Grim Barbarity of Optics and Design. Before we jump into it, I just want to give a big shout out to Ben Stiller, because he followed me on Twitter the other day, and I'm taking that we are best friends from that. The episode begins with Helly paying for her sins. Helly last episode hanged herself and let the elevator ride to the surface, ensuring the nastiest wake-up call you could ever receive. As she fights for her life, we see Mark casually talking to Dylan, almost catching him reading the banned book. Dylan wants the knowledge. He wants more perspective than he has, and he knows the risk of what he's doing, and he still thinks that it's worth it. It's curious that he's doing this at his desk and not suffering any kind of consequence for it, because we have a good number of things now hinting that the computer monitors, as well as, most of the things here, are bugged and being monitored. In my opinion, these are tiny little cameras monitoring them, so why don't they swoop in and just take them out? Perhaps that is why we get the shot of Helly from the perspective of the person monitoring the cameras that we've been discussing for some time now. It is the end of the day, people are wrapping up, security guards aren't there at their desks or exist at all, and Dylan isn't at risk because of that. Also, because Helly's been such a wrecking ball, everybody is focused on her next impact. Obviously not focused enough. Mr. Grainer comes running in, but Mark is the first to the scene. They manage to get her down, and Mark is forced into the elevator, where he immediately forgets this traumatic moment. There is something to be said about the body keeping score in a moment like this, but perhaps this highlights how good he is at masking those tense muscles and fear chemicals that were just released into his body.
Judd?
Mr. Scout, you have a good evening.
Will do. Same to you.
Or maybe he fears this forgetful elevator ride far more than we know, and Audi Mark is now used to feeling a bit odd every time he comes back to the surface. After all, any Mark's entire world was shattered by the idea that one day you could just not return without any warning or ceremony, so perhaps any Mark is fearing what is essentially the oblivion far more than he's letting on.
He's got some new job, or drunk on a beach, or dead.
That's enough, please.
One last thing about this scene is the monitor here has a ton of information on it, though a lot of it is cryptic. The first thing that grabbed me was archiving catalog. It's a weird thing to say in lieu of recording, though it does carry the same weight on the surface. It's saving the footage somewhere, and I think that highlights the purpose of this footage is more for study and review rather than a constant and active monitoring. It also shows a ton of different strings of numbers which could relate to identifying site location or time, or even where the archive is located. There is no date as far as I can tell, but this would need to be recorded in some kind of way. We don't have anything that says Kier site, and on the surface, it is a local site monitoring its own cameras, but if this never explained perspective is off-site, then perhaps these strings that do not change over the course of the scene could be identifying a serialized site ID. Also, because we just learned a couple episodes ago that the government is getting involved now, what if this shot is actually far in the future when the SEC, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, is reviewing what Lumon has been doing inside of their own buildings? This isn't a spoiler, it's just a theory. No clue if this actually happens, but what a fun Easter egg this would be if, this was the start of that reveal. The intro plays, and we get this beautiful establishing shot of Lumon. After Mark re-enters the severed floor, those terrified emotions come flooding back, and he is met with Mr. Milchek and Miss Cobell.
This happened on your watch, Marcus. And you can thank Kier himself it went the way it did.
The entire scene was just them making Mark feel bad for Helly's actions, and to me, this is saying that Miss Cobell needed to create a clear and guilt-stricken scapegoat, because this has less to do with his management ability and more to do with hers. It happened on all of their watches, and Miss Cobell is the highest-ranking person responsible. She didn't want to go under for what Helly chose to do, so they tell Mark that he must carry the burden before strutting away to avoid his questions about why they would make her return at all. Then Mark goes back to his desk and continues reading the You Are, probably looking for some kind of guidance in a moment like this.
What is it to fail? My failure to break into the literary world in my 20s was devastating, yet it taught me a vital lesson, that it was not me who was wrong. but literature itself.
The passage that he reads highlights failure and how it wasn't bad writing that made Ricken's book not sell, it was literature itself. Another way to put this is it was the system itself. Mark is reading this directly after a perceived failure, but it's not his fault, but the system at large. And regardless of if you believe that to be true, the perspective is that of someone who has never known prolific words like this to be false. He is hearing this, and we focus on Mark for a good while as he studies this forbidden knowledge in front of him. He is taking it to heart. His failures are not his own, but the people that tell him that he is failing. Ricken's writing, being bad or sounding bad, has some wild depth here. Just hear me out.
My failure to break into the literary world in my 20s was devastating, yet it taught me a vital lesson. What separates man from machine is that machines cannot think for themselves. Also, they are made of metal. Bullies are nothing but bull and lies. Stop and ask if it's truly you that must change, or the system.
They want us to understand that his writing is bad, but what he is saying may not be. Like I talked about before, everything we hear from him borders between inspired genius and delusional overthinker. He explicitly says that his previous failure in literature was not his fault, but the fault of the existing systems not understanding him. He didn't know all of the rules of formatting or how to make his sentences in a way that others enjoyed, or that you can't say that times in that sentence. It is telling us to listen to him in a way that sounds ridiculous because we won't listen to him because he sounds ridiculous. But to the people that don't know all of the existing rules of literature or speech like a severed worker, they are hearing what he has to say and not how he sounds. It's actually genius, and I hope they make that point clear in season 2, because whoever wrote this and this overarching plot of Ricken, it's kind of genius if this is actually how this is playing out. I hope when all of this unfolds, you get some acknowledgement more than just me talking about it right now, because it's so well done, again, if true. In terms of philosophy, this has merit. Art is one of the most subjective things in the world. Freedom is both the greatest thing you can ever have when it is time to create, and an absolute plight that will prevent you from doing so. Writing is an art that I have perceivably failed at as well. In 2019, I released my first book called Cyclic. It was a full-length story, and undiagnosed ADHD made the first 25 years of my life quite bookless. I didn't know all the rules. I didn't know any of the rules. I didn't know formatting. I just had a story that I wanted to tell that I had been thinking about since I was a kid, and I pushed really, really hard to make that reality. I taught myself as much as I could, and after it sold a few hundred copies, which in some circles is a crazy amount sold, I felt quite accomplished. But then my self-published story went to a double-digit search result page, and I stopped caring to check if I sold any more copies that year. I haven't checked in 2 years. I loved what I did, and I will do it again. But to some, I failed. As Ricken does, I could argue that literature itself was the thing that created that perspective, because without knowing that Tolkien sold millions, my book selling hundreds wouldn't have been reduced to a failure. The point is, Ricken being viewed as a failed writer has some additional meaning, and what he is saying isn't as delusional as it first sounds. We need to not view him as a goofy dude because he looks like a goofy dude. He has something to say, and even if he has perceivably failed at being good at writing, the message is still there to be read. And now people that don't know if he is a bad writer or not are reading that message. I'm still on the edge of my seat to know if he is leading the world towards something good or not, but I guess we'll just have to wait and find out.
Should you find yourself contorting to fit a system, stop and ask if it's truly you that must change, or the system.
We then hear Mr. Grainer tell Miss Cobell that Petey was in fact reintegrated.
Full synaptic coupling. Peter Kilmer's memory was reintegrated.
It's then revealed that the board does not know what happened to Helly, and that before bringing these results to the board, Miss Cobell wants to find out all of the information she can about who made this happen.
Comb the chip data for source signatures.
We then see Mark leaving and discovering a phone filled with missed calls from his pregnant sister's husband.
Shit.
As he speeds toward the birthing retreat, we hear Ricken's voicemails and their varying degrees of concern.
It's one of the more affordably sized units, but you should be able to find it. Please do come soon.
Finally, Mark arrives and gets met by Alexa, who we last saw during his really bad date, where he had maybe one too many drinks.
Forced labor. Fucking really?
Yeah.
They talk about Rickon crying over Devin.
Rickon is doing this thing where he cries over her, so I'm giving them some privacy.
And finally, Mark makes his way to the waiting couple. They briefly talk about the giant lodge next door and Devin's thoughts about them.
It's like a frickin' lodge. I hate whoever's in there.
It's just fat cats making fat kittens.
Before the contractions start again and Mark is called to help create a soul void,
Fetus is drawn to clear air. Purging secrets can create a soul void that speeds the labor. Okay.
Rickon shares that he was upset that Mark has not read his new book, The You Are, which isn't exactly true, but Audi Mark doesn't even know this book exists yet. As a reminder, the one they are reading on the inside has made its way here by Miss Cobell stealing the advance copy from Mark's front door. In terms of who is most responsible for how the innies act after reading such different words, I think it's important to remember who brought the book in the first place and who seemingly stopped caring about it after it was left on this chair.
Definitely haven't seen that. I mean, it must have been stolen or something.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh. Ooh. Okay, I'm okay. You okay?
Devin goes and spies on the lodge next door, finding a man dressed in all white leaving the fat cat's suite, ignoring her calls entirely. She gets caught peeping through the window and awkwardly saves face.
I'm another pregnant lady. I'm from over there. I have beautiful coffee. Okay.
The lodge is massive, and we meet Gabby for the first time. She is on her third child, and Devin finally asks,
Hey, Rich.
We then see Rick and Markin talking about the stolen book and how the thief would turn himself in once he actually reads it. It's another moment that makes this man the fool, but highlights how he so intimately believes the moral framework that he's captured inside of it. And, what this book could actually do if people took it seriously. It's also fun to consider if the book actually did have an impact on Mr. Milchek in any capacity. Surely he wasn't the thief, but he was tasked with reading it and then mindlessly left it out in the open for the workers that he's supposed to be protecting for them to find. It's not exactly what Rickon describes, but if Mr. Milchek made the choice to leave it for the others and give it back to Mark, who it was truly intended for, instead of just leaving it on this chair and never returning, I feel like there's some fun depth there. I also feel like maybe it makes more sense as well.
I made friends with the richest lady in baby camp.
Then they share some secrets to clear the air and let the baby come into a clean world. Or whatever the Rickon said earlier. Mark shares with Devin that he doesn't exactly trust Lumon right now, and he wants to share more, but the contraction stops the conversation, and Rickon wakes up to check on his hurting wife. Mark goes to get Alexa to do midwife things, and we hear this line from Devin, which I can't add more context to right now, but I will in later episodes.
Why do people do this?
I'll go get Alexa.
I'm sure that without context, this either makes little sense to you or you understand it and the implications right away. Either way, let's keep it moving. We see Mark reflecting by the water as a voiceover of the couple giving birth, hints at what he's been reflecting on, only to get overthrown by a ringing phone and the image of Petey dropping dead. The scene ends with joys of childbirth going well, and we see Mr. Milchek talking to Innie Mark.
So this will be Innie Helly's first conscious experience since the hanging. Do you know how to make your eyes kind?
They practice making kind eyes at each other, and then Mark finds a terrified Helly who does not understand why her boss is staring at her like that. They talk about the new safety measures to keep her safe, and then Mark leans down and whispers, asking if she wants to talk about it. He means not in an official sense, but like human to human, peer to peer. He is absolutely not understanding that he is not her peer, and all she sees from her perspective is a boss trying to manipulate her to not resist her enslavement anymore.
And if you want to focus on looking for happy numbers for a while, that's fine.
The team discusses what to do in order to motivate Helly. Irving wants to hide inspirational Kier quotes around the office, and Dylan wants to highlight the incentives. Episode 3 dove heavy into this theme and about how to properly motivate a workforce. Irving found issue with Dylan so heavily pushing the incentives and that she needed purpose in order to truly thrive in a place like this. Mark doesn't really add to the conversation, but instead dives into the book that he has been reading in secret. It's like he's looking for which one of them is correct while they actively debate, and instead of turning to the handbook, he cracks open the UUR. It's showing us the real clause that this book already has in Mark, and before he can really learn anything about what happens or how to advise anything,
I'm here to observe Helly.
like she said, she is here to monitor Helly, to sit there and study her in the most creepy way humanly possible. Miss Casey does offer a hug, but Helly doesn't want any part of anything, really. Her defeated status hangs over her head, and while that is going on, the black ooze that stresses Irving comes back onto the canvas. The ceiling leaks, Mark's missing an eye, and Irving is panicked when he snaps out of it and says that he needs to talk to Bert right away. Mark allows him to go, but tells Irving to make a copy of the map before leaving, just in case anything goes wrong. And then, of course, it does. This is called The Grim Barbarity of Optics and Design, and it is where the episode gets its title. The painting depicts the scene that Dylan has been swearing by from the very beginning, and if you want a 10-minute deep dive into some theories around this moment in particular, check out my most recent video called This. For the sake of this episode review, it's only important to know that this painting shows green badges, which represent O&D murdering the blue badges, which represent MDR. A couple things I didn't cover in that video that I think are worth mentioning is how this painting seems to be inspired by Francisco Goya's Saturn devouring his son, and how this man in the back here is the creepiest part of the entire thing. It is a gore-filled experience, and he calmly stands by the door watching all of it with a smile. So to me, this is the person behind everything, smiling because the point is for them to fight each other. He maintains control while everybody is too busy looking to kill each other. It's gorgeously haunting, but let's continue. Mr. Milchek is there and ready to spin a story for Irving.
I'm sorry, Irving. We must have sent this print job here by mistake. You weren't supposed to see this.
What are these?
A joke from Miss Cobell.
And if you needed any more proof about what this man represents and how he's creating the tension in this scene, it is this. It's Mr. Milchek, or management in general. Though again, my video dives more into that. Mr. Milchek maintains his composure here. The actor given instruction for a muted delivery that carries the authority that he has without any need to inflect or assure. His words are final. Nothing like this could happen here, and that's that. Dylan and Irving talk about O&D being a danger to them, and then Mr. Milchek and Miss Cobell are discussing what had just happened.
You ran a 266 on Irving B?
Yeah. Just now. I thought it might dissuade him from spending so much time with Bert G.
So this was a known tactic, a numbered play from a playbook we have never seen, but it's proof that they have done this before or had a need to plot and plan just in case this could happen. This was proof of their Machiavellian ways and ability to torture their workers if it meant they would work better or more efficiently, the ends being the only thing that they care about.
I saw Miss Casey down there. You're having her watch Helly.
And this apparently isn't in the manipulative manager playbook, and Miss Cobell explains her reasoning for breaking away from the standard operating procedure like this.
The light of discovery shines truer upon a virgin meadow than a beaten path.
It's a rather odd statement, but I'm understanding this as Miss Cobell feeling the pressure to make the Helly situation work. The playbook no longer working, so she must take the road less traveled. Mr. Milchek doesn't say as much here, but it's clear that he does not think that this is a good idea. She wants Helly to find herself or her purpose in here like the others have, and since the beaten path isn't working, it's time for something new. It's unclear why she thinks this will work or where the idea of turning Miss Casey into a Helly babysitter came from, but I don't think we really need to know. The point is, things are getting weird, and it's time for those Hail Marys. I also love this moment.
I'm trying something new with Miss Casey.
This intense focus on her is something else. It's the authority that Mr. Milchek had when talking to Irving, but since the subject is Miss Casey in the sentence, I'd say that Miss Casey is also being observed here.
Keep it between us.
We then see Helly in the bathroom trying to comfort or clean herself in the bathroom sink. The ring around her neck is a stark reminder of how hopeless escape is, and when she leaves the bathroom, her new prison guard is waiting and ready.
Please describe for me your time in the restroom.
Mark purposefully spills coffee on Miss Casey's notepad to give Helly a break from her watchman, and Miss Casey resists for just a moment.
I can watch Helly R while you're gone. It's only a few minutes, right?
Distribution supplies 8 minutes. Round trip.
Which has some depth with things that we learn later about how Miss Casey was really feeling in this moment, which I guess is kind of a spoiler because Miss Casey is really displayed as this emotionless tool. She is the authority of therapy or appropriate workplace emotion and acts like a faux picture of stoicism. It's like she's someone's understanding of what this role in the workplace would be, and that's why she doesn't as much as emote when presented with a situation that she doesn't want to be in. This betrays her, and it lets Mark and Helly escape the jailer for a few so that they can have a private conversation about how Helly is really feeling.
You know, I go to distribution supply all the time, so I could, if you...
This conversation felt like one of the most real, first moments between Helly and Mark, where she was really starting to view him as a peer under the same pressure as herself instead of a boss and the cog that kept her unwilling body in motion. Mark wants her to help with the map, and she just outright denies him.
I'm not your new PD.
Once Miss Casey returns, she learns that the two of them are missing and delivers the news to Irving that Bert G was spotted in the conference room, kind of just there. Irving sneaks over to feel his heart beat, and Dylan, the muscle show madman, pushes Irving out of the way and locks Bert G inside.
He was coming at you! Let him out! Let him out! Let him out! Fuck is he here? You saw that painting? You want to get disemboweled today?
We get this shot of the security room, all of the screens recording as the tense moment plays out. Irving screams for a manager, and after the scene changes, we are left wondering if they are coming or not. This matched the scene when Helly hanged herself, and we were given this screen here, but really no indication that anybody was watching until Mr. Grainer came running full speed. This time, nobody is coming running at all. This scene ends and we see a black hallway. The two crossed adventurers finding places that they have never found before. They start talking again about how she is feeling and what Helly could want while she is down here. Mark has long understood that escape is not an option and found reasons to justify his own treatment, but Helly has not and may never, and it gets a little too real for the workplace.
What do you want? In here.
It's for her to wake up while the life drains out of her and to know it was me who did it.
We return to the Bert G lockdown, Irving unable to find anybody else, and Dylan taking this as confirmation that the grim barbarity of optics and design was a prophecy that he foresaw.
Our department chief and new hire have gone missing. Do you know where they are?
No. Bert affirms that he is only there to see Irving and says that he was working on a joke to make a good impression, citing that as why he was pacing around the conference room alone. Bert was worried that them touching hands had spooked Irving or made him feel weird or anything else. Despite this information being said in front of Dylan, I don't think he felt anything but butterflies toward this man. Then we get down to tax brackets.
Why did you lie about the number of people in your department?
He describes this general environment of mistrust toward MDR that makes most of his department view them in an unsavory light. He cites that all of it is jokes or little jabs, but the feeling carries just the same. Your buddy can only joke about a group of people having pouches for so long before you start looking at him like, are you actually racist?
You all have pouches.
Like to carry young?
Yes, according to some. You each have a larval offspring that will jump out and attack.
That's fucking psycho.
I mean, it's a joke, of course, but I don't know. People are weird.
So the feeling that Dylan has carried for O&D this entire time also continues in O&D toward MDR. This is a divide and conquer strategy by management to keep the departments from getting too close. And while we can't confirm the exact reason yet, we can speculate something has happened historically which set the standard operating procedure here. Either they all teamed up and finally saw the manager managers for the overseers that they are, or they all grouped up and found that unionizing was the best practice to prevent abuse. Either way, management put on the Ghostbusters theme song and kept announcing how busting makes it feel good, as it decided that no unions could ever happen here, and the departments couldn't even be friendly to each other at this point. In the wake, they left these breadcrumbs about a story that likely never happened. MDR knows the story of O&D's barbarity. O&D knows that macro-dats have a calamitous way about them. Both are fully in charge of their own chains, which keep them bound to the fields that they work and isolated. If anything did happen between these two departments, I fully believe, and it was probably more than just these two departments, fully believe that it was them teaming up against management, but only time will tell.
In this theory, the larva eventually eats and replaces you.
Now listen, Linda, listen, please. This is one of those tongue-in-cheek moments that will eventually be a shock to us. There are underlying themes of cloning or bringing back the dead repurposed or goats being raised in dark hallways. I'm just saying, this moment could mean more than the statements delivered before. It might not be the larva eating and replacing them, but it could be any number of things relating to the implants, and this as a metaphor to maybe their bodies being reused after death. I don't know, honestly. I don't know why this stands out to me so hard, because the entire thing is meant to be a bit ridiculous, as it's about kind of stereotyping the others, but it's something, and it relates to Lumon in a way that it feels like there's a weird relationship between life and death, and I don't want an episode to go by without me saying that aloud.
Are you sweet on this guy?
You disapprove?
Dylan finally learns the truth and very much disapproves.
Certainly the handbook forbids taking heart to other employees.
Brad, fuck the handbook. This guy's Owen goddamn D, who are duplicitous snakes to a one.
While that is going on, Mark and Helly walk side by side until they find a bunch of kids being kids. There is a man feeding these goats, and these really interesting pillars that appear to have some kind of nutrition distribution system, if I had to blindly guess about whatever I'm looking at right now. The other odd thing here, to me at least, is this outlet. I don't know why, but it feels like it's so out of place and it draws my eye, and I think you do things like that for a reason, but I could be completely wrong here.
It isn't time. Go!
This was just such a wild scene on my first watch, and even after I don't know how many watches now, it confuses me to no end. It feels like it relates to Lumon altering perceptions at this moment, meaning reality was something else entirely, and we just saw goats because they saw goats. There are a dozen theories that explain this wild moment. Like, truly pick any topic and you could probably like insert the goats in that sect of thinking. By the end of the first season, they only remain as theories. So let me hear what you think. Fill the comments with whatever you think this means. Does it relate to their implants? Are they clones? Are they actually human children and our perceptions are being played with? Or are these just goats being goats? Let's hear it.
The grim barbarity, optics and design.
That's what it said.
There's definitely no painting by that name.
Bert has been bound and is being walked back to O&D. Even in this awkward moment, the two of them are hitting it off, and then we get this beautiful shot.
You know that relationships beyond the platonic are frowned upon anyway.
Is that what we are?
The mission to drop him off is now complete, and they are ready to go their separate ways, but Bert wants to show him something in the storeroom, begrudgingly inviting Dylan to their private moment as well, and begrudgingly, Dylan decides to attend. They go and look at the courtship of Kier and Imogene, which shows the moment where their founder found the love of his life while at work. They talk about how the handbook clearly doesn't account for all that it should if their founder, who was a stew man at an ether factory, met the love of his life, a swab girl, while at work. The painting does a great job of showing this moment, but I don't know what a stew man at an ether factory is, nor if a swab girl was ever a real role that anybody ever performed outside of ancient civilizations, like that had women fanning kings or something. Perhaps that is the weight it is meant to carry. She was purely this dedicated woman and blotted his sweat without any kind of inhibition. If you were unaware, like I was before a bit of digging, ether is known as the first ever anesthetic. Before the invention of this, people would just bite sticks or physically get knocked out before painful surgeries. This was an incredible breakthrough in modern science. Its origin is also cloaked in mystery, as we've never been able to identify the original source of ether. It's something that has existed in a few different forms until finally it had an official name. At one point in certain parts of the world, it was preferred over alcohol because of its potency, but because of the dangerous side effects like the fumes alone being highly reactive, in a time of candlelit homes, it became less and less common. It is still around, but the picture showing the creation of this highly combustible liquid in a large open vat, it just feels wrong, but sincerely, I don't know enough about the ether creation process to say for sure. I just doubt it was ever like this, and I think that makes this an artistic choice more than anything else. The name Imogene also stood out to me as I went searching for more details, and found that the name just means girl or maiden in Gaelic, the language in which this name originates from. So it kind of feels like it's a name meant to highlight the man more than anything else, and she is just the woman along for his patriarchal rise. But then I searched for the meaning of the name Kier and learned at 31 years old that this is another term for the word vat, which kind of turns the previous concept on its head if you consider the stylistic choice to have this amount of dangerous fuming chemical being created in an open vat. It's dangerous, and that could highlight how these two suffered side effects from this toxic sleep-inducing chemical, or it's saying that this is the courtship of a girl and the ether itself. Like perhaps this is showing us the powerful woman knowing how revolutionary this chemical was, and she was the driving force for the creation of Lumon. Kier is simply the vat or the means of production, and this is really about how a maiden had the foresight to create what this company became. I ultimately don't know, but I feel like that's a cool theory that I wanted to share.
My handbook just says they were bonded by the spirit of industry.
Kier could still exist in this artistic interpretation, but if it's ever revealed that Imogene was making plays while he was the fool spouting words that he thought were wise because of the side effects of ether consumption, I think they foreshadowed this perfectly. It also makes me look at Rickon and Devon again, since I am fully convinced that we are meant to draw some kind of connection between Rickon being this self-proclaimed font of knowledge and Kier writing the original handbook. Could Devon really be the person that we need to be watching when everything is playing out?
Makes you wonder how something could be wrong if Kier...
Get away from him!
Dylan, what?
You lying fuck!
This is when the macrodata refinement calamity is brought out and discussed. I talked about this earlier and again in my most recent video, so the only thing I want to add here is that I hope you're enjoying this video. Hit that like button, subscribe, and make yourself feel happy for supporting an American-made small business or whatever you enjoy. Just like pretend I fit that mold.
What if the goats are the numbers? Like we're deciding which goats live and which ones... God.
Mark and Helly continue bonding over the shared weirdness that today has brought, and this question is probably the biggest reason the entire community speculates about the goats being more than just goats. Like the show already asks us to imagine an impossible workplace. Why couldn't these just be goats, and maybe goat yoga was going to be an incentive or something? This rhetorical question conditioned us to start looking for depth, and I love that.
I know you don't want to be here. I'm glad you are. I'm sorry that this is the best I can do right now.
You give me the map, I'll clean it up. Your drawing is shit.
And just like that, the trust between manager and worker has really begun. Miss Casey finally finding them as well.
I'm glad. I was scared.
Sorry?
I forgive you.
We then see Miss Cobell watching and Mr. Grainer confirming that he was doing the same. Also, generally being curious why she was letting this happen. Like I said a moment ago, it's all about the bond between manager and worker, and Helly now trusts her boss.
The surest way to tame a prisoner is to let him believe he's free.
There's a Kier quote for everything.
Meaning that them finding the goats after Mark wanted to privately buddy up to her was the plan that Miss Cobell ran. It wasn't in the playbook, it was risky, but she knew that Mark would do something like this because he's tried a few times now. He's a good guy. He wants to be real with her. In fact, he's tried since the very start when the operating procedure wasn't working with Helly during orientation.
Well, what if I just talk to her? Okay, my name's Mark.
Ow!
It's not clear how they were directed, if they were directed at all, to this strange area that we've never seen before, but I've theorized a couple times about how Lumon could affect the workers' perceptions of the hallway, so maybe it could relate there. It really doesn't matter though. Her plan worked, and she lets Mr. Grainer know his place.
Upstairs wouldn't look kindly on this.
Yes, Daddy.
And let me just say, finally, we return to O&D as Dylan and Irving meet the rest of the team, and the world, to some, is healing.
I want to introduce you all to Irving and Dylan. They're from MDR. They're friends.
But with that, we come to the end of the video. Please be sure to hit that like, subscribe, comment. Also, big shout out to everybody over on Patreon. If you would like to support this content, please consider checking out my Patreon in the description below. Also, again, big shout out to my best friend over on Twitter, Big Ben Stiller. Yeah, listen, I've heard a lot about manifestation, okay, in the last year. And I'm an analytical brain, all right? I also think I'm an emotionally intelligent brain. I feel like I weigh the two. And a lot of times manifestation sounds like bullshit. But I started telling the internet that me and Ben Stiller were best friends because I just thought it was so funny. And now Ben Stiller knows that I exist. That's all I want to say. That's all I want to say, all right? Manifest whatever you think you should manifest. For me, I chose, not like the love of my life or like $1 million or like a new home or buying my mom a car or like anything else. I chose Ben Stiller as a friend. All right. So manifest wisely. I'm not saying I'm upset with my choices. In fact, I'm very happy with them. I'm just saying that if I picked a manifestation thing, knowing manifestation was maybe real, I would have, maybe I manifested differently, like as my first thing. I didn't realize it was like a genie wish thing. And maybe it's not. Maybe in retrospect, like none of this would have ever happened. Maybe I'm just conflating that me and Ben Stiller are actually best friends because he followed me on Twitter. But also, who are you to say that Ben Stiller and I aren't best friends, okay? I've manifested it, okay? And I'm going to keep manifesting it because at this point, I don't think I could switch over to like $1 million manifestation. I think that it's like a genie, you get one shot thing, like a shooting star. I really don't know. I don't know anything about manifestation, but I think it would be so funny if we really started talking about manifestation in these comments. So the people that have made it this far in the video, please give a big shout out to Ben Stiller and manifestation for no other reason than it would be funny to confuse everybody else who is trying to figure out what we're talking about right now. But much love, everybody, and I cannot wait to talk to you all again soon.